Joining me now to weigh in on all of this is Obama supporter Robert Reich, who was, of course, Secretary of Labor under President Clinton. During that time, the administration was able to reduce the budget deficit while raising minimum wage and protecting worker pensions, all part of the Clinton record that it certainly likes to be argued about, but also held up as an example of what the next president will try to do. Mr. Reich, of course, is professor of public policy at the University of California and is the author of Supercapitalism, The Transformation of Business, Democracy and Everyday Life. Secretary Reich, welcome to the program.
Hi, David.
First of all, let me get your assessment of where things stand from Wall Street and then the ripple effects in the economy. Is this a time, in your judgment, for panic or patience?
Well, it's never a time for panic. I mean, this is not another great crash. It's not a great depression. But a lot of people, a lot of institutions, a lot of very wise investors are seeking safer ground. They're seeking safer ground because, frankly, nobody knows how bad things are going to get. Nobody knows where the bottom is. There are a lot of pieces of paper floating around Wall Street that have essentially no value because nobody can assign a value to them.
But there is a huge psychological effect from in the markets and on other industries that are not even as heavily leveraged as some of the investment banks were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, you find today even banks are refusing to lend to other banks. Now, when banks don't lend to other banks, you know that there's a crisis of confidence. And that crisis of confidence, David, really has its origin not just in the meltdown of the subprime loans and the mortgage lending crisis. It goes back several years. There has not been very much regulation of Wall Street. There's grown a whole set of markets with derivatives and complex derivatives. Nobody even knows what is in a lot of these portfolios.
Let me ask you here, what is the leadership test for these candidates as they debate the economy?
Well, the real question is, what are the candidates going to do about the mess on Wall Street? Essentially, you've got to regulate who is most sincere about regulation, who has a career or a record with regard to regulation. There are three kinds of regulations that are needed. Number one, disclosure rules, making sure that people actually know, investors and lenders know what is the value of these pieces of paper. Number two, capital requirements. Now, commercial banks have to have a certain amount of capital on hand, not investment banks. And number three, conflicts of interest. And there are a lot of them right now on Wall Street.
All right, let's talk about overall views of the economy. I referenced a moment ago that Senator Obama issued a 2-minute ad in which he talked about his economic goals in some detail. Here's just a portion of it. Let's listen.
Here's what I believe we need to do. Reform our tax system to give a $1,000 tax break to the middle class instead of showering more on oil companies and corporations that outsource our jobs. End the anything goes culture on Wall Street with real regulation that protects your investments and pensions.
Secretary Reich, what makes you believe that Senator Obama, in fact, has the right prescription to take on an ailing economy?
Well, first of all, since February of 2006, he has been pushing regulation of Wall Street, and John McCain has been deregulating. In fact, John McCain's whole history is deregulation. But there's also a more basic thing here, David, and that is that you got two different economic approaches. One is top-down, trickle-down economics. You give tax breaks to the rich, tax breaks to corporations. You deregulate, and you hope everybody gets better, and it all trickles down. The second is bottom-up. That is, you give tax breaks to people who are in the middle and lower middle class. You invest in education and job skills and health care, and you also regulate and make sure that the economy expands from the bottom up. Well, John McCain's entire history is top down, and Barack Obama's history and his policies are all bottom up. I think we need bottom up economic reform, quite frankly.
But let's talk about tax cuts, because Senator Obama wants tax cuts as well. What's different in terms of how President Clinton came into office is that the next president's going to face a budget deficit on the order of about $480 billion. Is it unwise to pursue tax cuts in that sort of climate, even if you're talking about bottom-up kind of tax cuts for the middle class?
Well, you've got to get the economy going again. You've got to put money in people's pockets. Now, John McCain says, let's give big tax cuts to the very wealthy. Let's continue the Bush policies, but I want to even go further, he says. More tax cuts for the wealthy and for big corporations. That's not going to help in this climate. What Barack Obama is saying is, let's have tax cuts for average working people. Let's also make sure that there are adequate investments in infrastructure, in technology, again, in healthcare and education. And that's how you grow the economy. If you grow the economy, then the budget deficit shrinks because the economy has so much more capacity to have a deficit.
Secretary Reich, what's different in this particular climate is that even those who are in the middle of this financial mess don't really know where the bottom is. We don't know where the way out is of a credit crisis. We don't know where and when the mortgage market is going to really bottom out. What challenge is the next president going to walk into on day one in terms of being a catalyst for economic growth?
Well, a lot of this boils down, David, to confidence. Right now, Wall Street is suffering from a crisis of confidence. It hasn't yet terribly affected Main Street. It certainly has affected Main Street in terms of a lot of people worrying about their jobs and having difficulties getting loans. But what the danger here is that Wall Street's near meltdown could cause huge havoc on Main Street if a lot of small businesses cannot get loans, if average workers cannot get any kind of help with regard to buying a new house, if the entire credit market clogs up for Main Street. And what the new president has to do, and I happen to believe that Barack Obama can do this much better than John McCain, is establish enough credibility through adequate regulation and also through kind of a vision of where that man is going to be taking this economy. I think Barack Obama can do that.